Call to order for a Watertown City Council meeting for October 15th, 2024 to discuss the budget. Please rise while Councilman Schutte leads us in prayer.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day you have blessed us with for all of us and for so many reasons in the life that you give us, the families you give us. But today, at this very moment, Lord, may we not take this for granted, how we can come together like this and the responsibilities you have given every individual in this room. You've given us, there's responsibilities that we have to help lead a city. And for all different various forms, different abilities, different challenges. But we come together as one today, Lord, to work through the financial budget of a city, to work together as a team. I thank you for the leadership you have put in place to lead this great city. And may this day and this next year bring you glory as we work through the finances and all that entails. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for indulging me on that. Neither one of those were called for, but as most of you all know, I like leading off every official meeting with due respect to the entities, with God our Father and the great country that we live in. So thank you very much. With that, please call the roll.
Okay. Schutte?
Here.
Tupper?
Here.
Bueller? Here. Danforth? Absent. Helene?
Here.
Jurens? Absent. Peters?
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. Councilman Danforth has an excused absence. He has already gone through at least a large portion of the budget with City Manager Mack and myself. Councilman Jurens is going to be here in just a little bit. With that said, Chair will entertain a motion to approve today's agenda. Motion made by Councilman Peters, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We have one item on the agenda, and that is a review and public hearing of the 2025 manager's proposed budget. Manager Mack, take
Mayor
it away.
Helene. All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. We are excited. Well, I am anyway. I can't speak for the rest of the group. Excited to share with you the 2025 proposed budget. A couple of points before we dive into the presentation. First, please feel free to ask questions as we go. I think it is a little bit easier to do that when we're on a particular topic than to wait until the end. Secondly, the budget presentation is not different than the budget book, but it does not include everything that is included in the budget book. It's only a snapshot of what's in the book, and it highlights any major cost centers or proposed initiatives for 2025. Every year, the budget is a team effort, and that couldn't be more true this year, especially as we've significantly changed our budgeting process. Hindsight being what it is, it would have been probably very valuable for everyone at this table and everyone behind us to have changed our process back in May. But like any good team, they have pivoted and have done an exceptional job of providing numbers and being thoughtful as we've moved through this new process. I do want to give a special thanks to the department head team who've really rallied around every year they rally around the budget, but also just the way of doing things a little differently. A special thanks to CFO Bob Zine and her team for compiling all of the data and answering the many, many questions that have come. And an additional special thanks to our Assistant City Manager Von I for helping keep the trains on track. So with that, I will present to you the 2025 proposed budget. Here's our agenda. We're going to cover some highlights. The 2025 initiatives, so consolidations, fleet management, facilities, maintenance, the potential partnership between HSA and the police department, and then I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about a thematic goal that the department head team set back in July that is very pertinent to how we've come together around the budget. You'll see a total budget comparison of 2025 versus 24. We'll talk through primary revenue. We'll do budget funds overview, so the general fund, special revenue, and then our enterprise funds. outside agency support. We will talk a little bit about IM 28. The 2025 capital improvement plan highlights and overview. And then we'll dive into some departmental CIP projects. Any questions before we move on? All right. I got to keep up with my own notes here. All right. So, a thematic goal. You might be wondering what this is and how it impacts the budget. Back in July, when we, after everyone had submitted all of their budget requests, both operational and capital, we did a half-day workshop with the department heads. And kicking this work off, we went through an exercise to create a thematic goal. And that is a single, contemporary, and qualitative rallying cry that's shared by all members of the team. So that's at the top. Our goal was improve public perception of the city. Now, we all recognize that that doesn't mean that the public perception is bad. It just means that we can continue to improve every single day. So we moved on to standard operating objectives. That's the bottom of the chart. So these are the ongoing priorities of the organization, and they're shared by all members of the team. So all of the work that we do, including putting together the 2025 budget, should meet these standard objectives. So retention, you'll see that reflected in wages and benefits. Safe community, so that is obviously public safety, but it's also how we maintain our roads, how we keep our park facilities. Quality and consistency, that is the theme throughout this entire document, as well as how we are working towards operations. We want to provide quality services consistently, time and time again. Transparency, this is just enhancing the transparency that we do inherently have as an organization. And then managing expenses. Again, this whole budgeting process is all about managing expenses and expectations. Then you have our defining objectives. And these, again, are temporary qualitative components of the thematic goal. So in order to improve public perception of the city, we know we need to create a clear and understandable financial plan, which we believe we have in front of you. Part 2 of this will come in November when we tackle the long-range capital improvement plan. A customer service culture. Again, we believe that that is throughout our budget proposal as it relates to some of the initiatives that we're proposing. Improving and automated internal processes to become more efficient. Utilizing technology that we have in front of us. And enhancing the council and staff relationship. We really believe that if we continue to move forward with our standard operating objectives in front of us, it only enhances the relationship that as staff we have with you all as elected officials. Any questions on that? The crickets are chirping. That was very timely. Okay, moving on. So the budget calendar, we currently are in October. So from May to September, we conducted internal budget meetings between myself and the different departments. We certified the 2024 property tax levy at the end of September and beginning of October. Right now, we're doing the budget hearing on the operating budget. In November, we'll do the first and second reading of the budget appropriation ordinance. We'll publish the ordinance, and then we'll conduct the council workshop on the long-range CIP. And then in December, end of November, beginning of December likely, we'll bring forward the proposed resolution fee, the long-range CIP for approval, and then finalize the budget book. So we are nearing the finish line on what has been a long process.
City Manager Mack, I know that we have discussed this, but in case anyone watching is not aware, could you discuss what is different this year with the long-term CIP? Because normally we would discuss the CIP at the same time as we're doing the budget. We're not doing that this year.
Correct. So historically, the city has produced a 5-year capital improvement plan. We have proposed moving that from a 5-year to a 10-year. And within that, carving out what we are calling council priority projects. So, and we'll cover this a little later in the presentation, but some of those big capital projects like a street facility, like a clubhouse, like 31st Street, and really working to streamline and, to streamline the capital fund so that it is more orderly, so it's less of a wish list, that there are things that are planned for, and funding has been identified in each year for how they're going to be. One of the reasons that we've requested pushing off the discussion on the long-range plan is related to IM 28. That will, if it does go into effect, and if municipalities are impacted the way that we believe they will be, that does have a significant impact on that long-range capital.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, our budget priorities. So our people, successful negotiations. We are currently negotiating with all 3 of our employee unions with the goal to keep our wages in line with peer communities as well as the Midwest CPI, with a continued emphasis on professional development. We are transitioning from a historical averaging budget process to a base budgeting process. You'll see creation and implementation of a citywide facilities maintenance program, the creation of a citywide fleet management program. You'll notice that does not say implementation in 2025. We'll talk about that a little further along. You'll notice that there are no new FTE requests in this budget. There are no new programs that cannot be absorbed within existing budgetary dollars. So this is a very small, it's the very small print. This is why you have a handout in front of you. This just shows the summary of all budgeted full-time personnel. It's in the budget book every year. We have restructured the document to more accurately reflect the structure of our organization. And if there's an asterisk, that denotes an enterprise fund. Any questions on that? Okay, so 2025 budget highlights. Excuse me. Accurate and conservative budgeting. You will notice, not only throughout the presentation, but when you look at the budget book, we continue to conservatively budget our revenues and conservatively budget our expenditures. One thing that came out as we were going through the process is that we were overly conservative in our expenditures and overly conservative in our revenue projections. Reducing the budget deficit for the general fund versus previous years. So here's where the change in our budgeting process has really come into play. Historically, the city of Watertown has budgeted using averages, meaning there is typically some carryover dollars in each budget that historically just don't get spent. But we have to carry those dollars on the books, meaning we have a structural deficit. So annually, when we propose the budget, and we say the budget is balanced, that includes utilizing unrestricted cash to balance the budget. So when we shifted to this base budgeting process, the first thing we did was go line by line through every budget. And because of technology that we invested in a couple of years ago, we now have much better data in front of us to understand our historic spending, excuse me, trends and patterns. And so going line by line, we were able to look at the last 5 years of actual spends and compare that to the budget requests. And by doing that, when we started the process after everything had been submitted, we were looking at a $3.9 million structural deficit. So utilizing $3.9 million of unrestricted cash to balance the operating budget. So we thought, hey, we could probably do a little better than this. And where can we right-size budgets to free up those unrestricted cash dollars to put towards those council priority projects, starting to build, if you will, sort of a savings account for specific projects that you all have deemed as priority. We were able to take that structural deficit from 3.9 million down to 2.3. And I want to make note that that did not cut anything from budgets to prevent them from operating the way that they have in the past. So one area that we noticed where there was room for improvement and room for right sizing was on the employee side. So what we were seeing across departments was we were budgeting for a fully staffed department. So on the wages and benefits, those types of things, we were budgeting to be fully staffed. But then down in the operational part, we were also budgeting to not be fully staffed in terms of overtime and temporary wages. So we were able to reduce that deficit by right-sizing those employee dollars for each department. That was a pretty significant reduction in the deficit. Some other areas where we were able to find, I think I'm allergic to the budget. This happens every year. Some other areas we were able to find some significant savings were around, supplies, travel, professional development line items, where we just simply weren't using the dollars that were allocated every year. This budget, now I will again give the caveat that we are still negotiating with the unions. We've not come to full agreement on those contracts yet. And if anything should change or if we would request changes, we would bring that to you before the first hearing of the budget ordinance. But currently, we're looking at 4% wage increase for employees. The Midwest CPI is 3% roughly. We are also looking at 7% health insurance cost. That actually will be on the next agenda, I believe, to approve those premiums. We're projecting a modest sales tax growth of 2.1%, which is in line with what we're seeing currently. Probably a more stabilization of sales tax than we've had over the last 3 years. You'll notice that the general fund increase from the adopted 2024 budget is only 1.6%, or a little under $500,000. The budget itself is intuitive, it's lean, it's streamlined. It offers opportunities for efficiencies and organizational improvements, and it does have the long-term financial sustainability mindset. We prepared the budget to align with the council's vision and mission that you all set back in November of '23, which I will read it for you in case you've forgotten. The City of Watertown is focused on opportunities and responsible growth. We will provide excellent services and opportunities for everyone to be safe, happy, and successful. And we will lead with honesty, transparency, integrity, service, and grace. So the 2025 budget analysis report, this is a new document that we have prepared. This is largely for the public who may not want to spend time going through line by line of the budget, but it does give a high-level overview of the budget as a whole, which includes all funds. It includes the general fund, special revenue funds, and our enterprise funds. A couple of notes here that show, where do property taxes go? Well, only 18% of your property tax bill goes to the city. Again, no additional staff has been added, and the 2025 budget is a 24% decrease from the 2024 budget. Now, it's across all funds. So we went from a $90 million budget to 70 plus million in 2025. Any questions on that? Okay. So the total budget expense comparison. So in 2024, the adopted budget was just a little over 95 million. And the 2025 requested budget is 72 million, a difference of about 23 million. And that comes from the 28 million that was included in the 2024 budget for the wastewater project. You can see that we're, tracking pretty closely with where we've been in the past. All right.
City Manager,
Yeah.
the obvious dip is in the enterprise funds. Is that because of the wastewater plant?
Yes. Primary revenue sources. So where does the city get its capital from? The sales and use tax, so the first and the second penny. Property tax, the third penny. We do transfer in from other funds, and we do charge for services. We have fees, permits, and other taxes. First penny, as we mentioned, we're projecting a modest growth of 2.1% in 2025. This budget assumes no revenue impact from IM 28.
Okay, never mind. She just answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Should IM 28 pass, we would cover that shortfall through reserves, but 2026 will look drastically different than 2025 does. Property tax, you all did approve the property tax ordinance. Final approval was on October 7th. And again, shows for modest growth, about a 4% increase. And then our triple B tax, again, modest growth there of less than 1%. We have had some great strong years in triple B, but again, trying to be conservative in our revenues. So general fund transfers in. A transfer is the movement of resources from one fund to another to support activities without the expectation of repayment. So these funds are city funds, and the general fund, on principle, supports the entire operation of the city. And so we do that through these transfers. We receive an annual transfer in to the general fund from municipal utilities, solid waste, and wastewater. And you can see what those numbers look like over the last 4 years. And I wanted to highlight this. This is a question that comes up most years about the transfer from municipal utilities. I think it's important to note that the utilities is a function of the city with its own governing board. So when we say that utilities is transferring to the city, that's a little disingenuous. The transfer from municipal utilities goes into the general fund. It's not a separate organization that is giving money to the city. And you'll see that we receive a transfer in, and then we do a transfer out for streetlights and fire hydrants. And that's all that this shows, is just where we're at with those transfers. So typically outside of 2021, the general fund sees about a net $500,000 impact in revenue. Questions?
And city manager, I guess for those watching who don't know, how are these sums come to?
So the transfer in, I'm sorry. I sit down with the municipal utility manager and we negotiate, if you will. I think this is a 3%. I think it's a 3% increase for the next 3 years. The transfer out, the utilities did a transfer study a couple of years ago, and it's based on metrics that they determined appropriate for those costs.
Councilman Tupper?
City Manager Mack, and maybe you can answer this, maybe because it was for your time. How come in 2021 the transfer in was 1.57, way higher than what the transfer in projected for 25 is?
I believe that there was an additional transfer done in 21 for some kind of project.
Okay, thank you.
I can get that information for sure for you. Okay. So the general fund overview, our revenues plus the transfers in is $22.5 million, plus the use of $2.3 million in reserves, provides a balanced budget of our expenditures and transfers out of just under $25 million. And this is, again, the general fund. Councilman Peters, you look like you have a question. Okay. Okay. Back to that.
Councilman Beeler does have a question.
If I may, thank you, Mayor. We saw we're looking at revenues, we saw the first penny. Were you saving the second penny till the CIP?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss something. Did you say that already?
I don't know that I did, so thanks for catching that.
Oh, no worries, thanks.
Yeah.
Councilman Peters?
So the reason I was pondering is because are we not moving away from this model now in terms of the implement of the
So-
reserves?
So, yes, I was just going to comment on that. So when we started, the use of reserves would have been 3.9 million. And the transfer to Park and Recreation was 2 million, and the transfer to the airport was just under 1 million. And so through the right sizing, we reduced the 3.9 to 2.3, and we further reduced the transfer to Park and Rec by about 170,000, and then reduced the airport transfer as well. So the goal this time around was to truly right-size the budget.
So
It-
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What would some of these transfers, like 170,000 to Park and Rec, like what would that be on a given year? Like what are we?
So well, maybe that's a better question for Finance Officer Bob Zine, but we have historically transferred about $2 million a year to the Park and Rec Fund. And let's see if
For
go
what
back.
though? Not to.
From the
derail
general
this.
fund.
I know, but
Yeah.
for what projects or like what purpose?
This is simply operating.
Operating.
Yeah. So a special revenue fund, well, here, maybe it's easier to start with enterprise funds. So enterprise funds are structured as such that they are their own business. So they are supposed to cover all of their operations and their capital by the user fees that they charge. So airport, wastewater, solid waste are all enterprise funds. And we'll talk about airport here in a minute. A special revenue fund is set up to operate kind of like a private business, but knowing that because the amenities that are provided through the special revenue fund, so Park and Rec, the Wellness Center are both set up as special revenue funds, we simply can't charge enough to cover those costs and still provide a community service. So the $2 million transfer to Park and Rec is above and beyond what they bring in revenue through, pool passes and memberships to the zoo, things like that. So the goal every year is to reduce those transfers, but balancing that with increasing fees.
Okay, that makes sense.
And City Manager, I guess, while you mentioned the enterprise funds, you mentioned how the rate is set from the municipal utilities, but not from solid waste and the other enterprise funds. How do we come to the figure that is coming in from the city from those different enterprise funds or those different
You want to
entities?
tackle that?
So it's kind of operated a little bit different throughout the years. In the early years, we essentially would do 8% of the budgeted expenditures in those departments, and then that would be the transfer. We've kind of then right-sized it, and now this year it's a 4% increase. Just as we kind of calculated wages at a 4%, the transfer from those was increased by 4%.
The purpose of the transfer in from those enterprise funds is if they were operating truly as a private business, they would have their own accountant, they would have their own attorney, they would have their own HR, they would have their own engineers, and this covers the costs the general fund provides in services to the enterprise funds. I don't know if that makes sense or not. So going back to this slide and Councilman Peters' comments, we felt like this was a very responsible and reasonable budget to bring forward, given that this is an entirely new process. Additionally, to find 2.3 million out of the general fund will require a reduction in staff. There simply is not $2.3 million worth of fluff in the operations portion of the general fund to make that up. So what do we determine? It was like a 15% additional reduction in operating to make up the 2.3 million.
Thanks for not implying that the fluff is up here on the elected officials' side. So,
Look at me.
Never is. Never is. So,
Councilman?
Are we gonna get into the employees a bit later to talk through some of that?
what would you? I don't have anything else on employees, so happy to answer any
So when you
questions now.
say a reduction, maybe walk me through how that looks, and is it a transfer of personnel to different positions in different departments, or is it actually a reduction in total headcount?
Well, there's a couple of ways that you probably could handle it, and again, I don't want to send alarm bells. One, you could increase the transfers in, right, from wastewater and solid waste. But those will impact rates, which impacts the rate payer. The other way is to do a reduction in force, and I don't have any calculations on the number of positions or which positions, or before we got to that point, though, we would likely look at not filling vacant positions as they become available. It could look at, a wage freeze, things like that. I will say that, if the desire is to not use reserves at all, that's worst case scenario. It's not atypical or inappropriate to use reserves to balance your budget. We were doing it at a higher rate than we probably needed to be doing historically. Now, I'll let Kristen provide the more accurate number, but the 1.6 that we have found in right-sizing the operational budget, that's $1.6 million that we can put into the council priority projects. And there will be, an unrestricted balance from the general fund that carries over into 2025, of which we need to keep about 3 months of operating in there. And then the rest, based on your priorities, could be transferred into that council priority project fund. Do you have an estimate on what that carryover is going to be for 25?
Of what they'd have available?
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be to use close to 5 million. We'd
So
have to
the-
keep 6.5.
Yeah, so there'll be an additional, so 1.6, right, off the top that goes into your piggy bank, and then probably another 5 that we'll be able to transfer into your piggy bank.
Councilman, continue.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, you are, I'm tracking. How many current, maybe you said this, how many current openings do we have in city government across the board?
7? Maybe? I think we filled some recently, about 7.
Okay. Okay, I'm good for now. Thank you.
City Manager, you mentioned reserves, and I just want to, for the public, when you see the term reserves used, everyone, alarm bells go off and say, oh, you're dipping into reserves, you're spending more than what you got. Would you please explain or calm the fears? First off, how are our overall reserves? Are they healthy? Can we take these without being overly panicked for the uncertain future that we're facing?
I'll let Kristen speak directly to the current balances. A better term than reserves is unrestricted cash. So I think traditionally the term reserve means it's set aside for something specific. It's used interchangeably in government, reserves, unrestricted cash. But it's really the dollars you have left over that don't have any assigned project or cost center to them. And if you want to speak to the funds themselves.
In terms of the general fund, how we ended 23 and projected to end 24, we have a very healthy unrestricted fund balance. We ended 23 at a little over $12 million which there again, 3 months of operating on this budget is about 6.5 million. So, I mean, we definitely have some comfort there with our unrestricted fund balance. What was the other thing I was going to say? I think part of the 2.3, as we talked about some of the previous ways that we budgeted, which was more of an average basing for the revenue and the expenditure side, even at the 3.9, I would have probably anticipated that we wouldn't have needed much of the reserve. And I think what this is doing is it's getting closer to what that actual is. I think it's looking at the revenues and getting them a little bit higher to where they should be and kind of cutting out some of the expenditures. So that's the plan at 2.3, but I definitely don't think we'll use 2.3.
All right, thank you. And I wanted to make that clear to the public, the difference between reserved, the term reserved, and unrestricted cash is different, because a lot of times with government, money is allocated by law as to funds that we have to fund. City Manager, the other thing that I'd like to, also just for my own understanding, but for the public as well, when you're saying that the money would be basically taken up by not filling employee positions or taken out from the employee situation, this gets to a point where the public has to understand, and I think also council and staff, the council, we just approve the budget, which is the money. So we don't make a decision. I mean, if the positions are going to be cut or not filled, that's your decision, not ours. Correct?
Yes, but, we do, what did you
Well, and
say?
I'm not saying that as something bad, but it's, I mean,
No,
it's
so-
something for the people, it's something
Yeah.
for everyone to understand how you have like a push and pull
Right.
on this, and that it's not a perfect system, because we have to try to make a budget and propose. Now, something could change. I mean, we might desperately need a position filled, and at which point you would probably come back and say, oh, well, the budget wasn't completely correct. We need to make this, change. And at that point, the change you would make would be to come to us and ask for the funding for that position.
Right. If funding were not allocated for it, then absolutely we'd come back and ask for an appropriation for that. The charter does call out some language as it relates to creating new departments. I may be incorrect in this, but I think it also has some language on consolidating departments. If it's not in the charter, it's in the proposed financial stability policy that you guys will be talking about in November. So there is communication, there is give and take between the manager and the council on that. Now, of the 7 positions or 8 or however many we have, right? If we decided not to fill, and I'm not going to name a single department or division because I don't want any of these people back here to get nervous, but if we were to not fill a custodial position, I wouldn't necessarily deem that appropriate to bring to you all. It's just, hey, we just didn't fill this position because it wasn't needed. Now, if we, like we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, wanted to consolidate positions into a new division, like we are proposing for facilities maintenance, that absolutely is a discussion to have. It's, because that is a structural change within the organization. Now, ultimately, that is under the manager's purview, but it certainly doesn't make a lot of sense to do that without discussions on what that looks like operationally, how that might impact employees, what, if any, budgetary impact there is. And to the very first part of the question, the other thing that we need to be mindful of is there are opportunities for additional revenue to come in that we just certainly haven't explored. So whether that be, looking at front footage assessments, I know that the council prior to my time explored a stormwater utility, looking at all of our fees and making sure that they're in line with the market and peer communities. So I don't want to paint the picture that next year we're cutting, a bunch of employees, but that is the lowest hanging fruit to find dollars. And I do believe as an organization, we are right-sized. I think we have the right number of employees. But we have areas where we have certain departments and certain divisions that are undersized for where they need to be based on the work that they're producing. And I think we can get there within the current FTE allotment. But we may need to come back and say, hey, we would like to request a new employee in 2026. And here's the impact to the budget on that. So, yeah. Again, they're passing me notes. We're not proposing cutting staff at all. In fact, we're proposing an increase in wages, restructuring a little bit to better meet our needs. But that's a long-term projection to figure out how to continue to reduce the structural deficit. So,
And sorry to go back to something, but you said that with the budget, the union negotiations are not final. That is every union?
every union.
Okay.
All three.
And should council be concerned about that as far as the numbers might be coming in different?
So,
Yeah.
try to
I mean, I guess,
tread
yeah.
lightly here. What is in the budget presentation was the last offer that the city provided to the unions. There's been some requests for additional information, but that's where negotiations are at.
Okay.
Okay. Well, now here's the fun stuff. So it's all fun, I guess. 2025 general fund projects and initiatives. Again, no additional FTEs. We're streamlining our operations, so phones, recruitment, publications, creation and implementation of a citywide facilities maintenance program, which would include a comprehensive facilities study, the creation of a citywide fleet management program, software and technology, again, continuing to invest in automating some of our processes, and then employee development. We are requesting dollars to do a market update of the wage matrix, and then a continued emphasis on employee professional development. And over the last, 12 months since we did this last presentation, we've increased accountability measures within the organization around employee development. So, budget consolidation. This might seem like a very minor thing to the general public and maybe even to all of you. But let me talk to you a little bit about how the process works currently, specifically with our phones. So we have a lot of phones in our organization. And right now, all of the phone bills go to our IT director, Pete Boyle. And he gets all of them. And then he has to code them to every single department and division that each phone is charged to. It takes a little bit of time to do that. Same with recruitment within HR. So HR is responsible for all of the advertisement for positions, things like that. Finance, by state law, is responsible for minute publications and any, public hearing notices. So what the 2025 budget does is consolidate all of those expenses in the department that it makes sense. And so we consider IT, HR, and finance really the internal services departments of the city. They do have an external component, but largely they serve the internal customers, so our employees, all of you. And it just made sense to take those phone line expenses out of the individual departments and put them in IT, the recruitment budgets and put them in HR, the publication budgets and put them in finance. So if you're comparing last year's budget book to this year's budget book, that is a structural difference that you will see. Some continued work that we're going to be doing into 2025 is around some of these expenses, like phones, for example. We know that we can likely decrease our phone expenditure. By what amount? We're not sure. And what does that mean organizationally? Do we move to an entire new system? Do we move to an online system? We simply don't have the answers to that right now, but that is an initiative for 2025 is, again, continuing to try to lean up our organization and streamline the activities that happen within it, so that the less people who have to touch it, the better. It frees up time and resources for people to be doing the meat of the work that we've hired them to do. So we're really aiming to optimize the budget use without compromising service quality, both to the internal and external customers.
City Manager, Councilman Beeler had a question. We might have to go back a slide.
Thank you. Back to general fund projects and initiatives. Under employee development, one of the bullets says continued emphasis on employee professional development with increased accountability measures. Can you expand just a bit? We don't have to get too deep in the weeds, but can you give us what that looks like and maybe an example of what you're
Sure.
looking at doing there?
So each department has their own system for tracking accountability with their employees when they travel, what kind of professional development they're doing. What I've done for my team, we do have a new form that's required before any employee development or travel. And we also do, I can't think of the right words right now, but a report out. Here's what we came away from this conference with. Here's what we're looking to implement. You'll see all throughout this presentation, shameless plug, but a group of us were just at the ICMA conference a few weeks ago. Some of us are now yellow belt certified in lean processes. They didn't actually give us a belt, which was very disappointing. But taking those things that we learn and are trained on and really working hard to implement them throughout our organization and the individual departments. So there's a little bit more of a checks and balances when employees are traveling and what they're traveling for and what the benefit coming back has been. That answer your question?
Does council have access to look at those? I'm just curious.
I think I sent the form out when it got created, but I mean, guess.
The only reason I'm asking, and I don't want to rehash last year, is, we occasionally get asked by the public, and when we have no answer for them, it becomes very awkward for us and frustrating for the
Sure.
constituents.
Well, I think there's value in just, maybe asking. I don't want to, I'm on the spot, so I want to make sure I'm responding appropriately.
You can answer some other time. The point was not to put you on the spot. The point was to try to show the public that we're watching the dollars and we're trying to get results.
Yeah.
And that's great that you're doing it internally, but to the extent that the public, they only see a portion of it, and they judge based upon what they see as far as the trip goes. So
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the simplest way would be to just ask, hey, we heard that we had 3 firefighters at this training. What was it about? And we can, certainly supply that information. I am a little hesitant to, I got to think through this, and I don't want to be put on the spot with the media in the room. I don't want to be held to something.
then don't answer it.
Okay.
I'm kind of sorry I asked now.
No, it was.
No, it's a great question.
No, I'm kidding.
It was a question I was going to ask anyways.
Go ahead, Reed.
No, it was a question I was going to ask simply because it is a question that continues to be asked of me, and I know that I'm not alone there. And the point is not to limit career enhancement by any means. That's not what it is. It's just to give the public the answers when they're, they see something, they're going to knee-jerk react to a trip without seeing what value is coming back to the city of Watertown. That's all we're trying, is to give the constituents an answer.
Yeah.
Councilman Tupper?
Just maybe an easy way of putting that is just maybe a better way of informing the council, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here neither. So, actually, the results of some of these professional development. I'm all for professional development. I got nothing against it. So, we've got some great employees that deserve to keep going. So, in the accountability part of it, just maybe some quick reports back to the council of what was achieved, or, and that could, maybe that's asking too much too, because you got the police department, they go to training, fire department, everybody goes to training, so it's got to be a kind of a happy medium there someplace, so.
And-
If I could finish.
Yeah, and Councilman Beeler?
Thanks. I appreciate your response. I'm very happy that's on our radar. I trust our department heads will scrutinize these things and use their best judgment moving forward as to, the resources that we put into these things. I know we get a lot out of them. I'm all for team building, all those kind of things too, but thanks.
Well, and I would say, I think it was last year during the budget hearing when the question was asked, not by me, but there was answers galore that came up right on the spot that showed that we were not only getting good value, but we were actually saving money and implementing great procedures for the city. That is part of, you're always a big fan of saying, telling our story. If we could tell that story to the constituents, it just convinces them better that we are the stewards of the tax dollars that they want us to be. And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong as far as what people judge, but when they see employees travel, they will judge it based upon the travel and the location, not about what the conference gets out, what the employee gets out of the conference or what the city benefits from it. And right or wrong, indifferent, that is human nature. And that's just the reality that we're dealing with, and I thank you for, doing it internally, but I don't think it would be a terrible thing. And chances are, if you make it available to us, probably we'll never ask you for it.
No, I think that's all fine. One distinction I think that does need to be made for the public. If you look at the travel budgets in each department versus the professional workshops budget, the travel budget is significantly lower. So the assumption that everyone is traveling all of the time or with any kind of regularity simply isn't accurate. We do a lot of professional development in-house. We do a lot of professional development online. Some things just do require, a trip to Pier or, I don't know, Tim, where are you going next week? Boston, right? For a national committee that he serves on. So the other thing, and it's probably just a communication thing, right? Like we have 242 full-time employees. I don't directly manage 242 people. And so if, we're sending a slug of street guys and gals, to a conference, because I trust my department heads, I likely don't know about it until after they've gone and they're bringing something back or they're talking about it. And I don't know if we just need to increase what we're sharing, but we have the biweekly reports, and those weren't really being utilized, I think, across the board. So I'm open to suggestions on how we can better share the information, but also want to make sure that we're not, me included, I don't want to be micromanaging, division managers who are sending their people to a weed certification. Those are all real things, right? So, yeah.
And I don't think that is not what council is after, is micromanaging. And
Yeah.
that's why we're not bringing up the travel budget or career enhancement budget as a line item or anything like that, because that's not what we want to do. We know that this is an issue in the public. This is human nature. It will always be thus, okay? We just wanted some protection for the council and for the public to be able to answer them. And again, like I said, if you make it available, we probably won't ever ask for it. Because then the public knows that it's like, oh, okay, we'll ask for it, so anyway, I don't want to make a bigger deal out of it because it's, it's a public perception deal. It is not a monetary deal. We bring it up simply because it's brought up during the budgeting process. So we don't want to hijack the budgeting process for that. We just want to express the concerns that have been heard by the council. Sorry. Okay.
No, you're
Done.
fine. No? Anything more on budget consolidation? All right, another 2025 initiative is the partnership between HSA and the police department. And if he feels comfortable, I'd ask Chief Toomey to visit with you all about this initiative. But one thing, we said at the beginning of the presentation was no new programs that couldn't be absorbed within existing dollars. This is a program that could not be absorbed within existing dollars. So we found a creative way to fund it, utilizing our opioid settlement funds, which have a very specific purpose. And it was a creative way to try and meet this need out in the community. Chief Toomey.
Yeah, so 4 years ago, you guys allowed us to hire some cops on a cops grant. That grant is now running out. Part of that grant was have a mental health officer. I want to give a shout out to Officer Bicey. She's done a tremendous job. She's really made a lot of connections and really highlighted the issues that are within our community. Mental fitness is a
I'm sorry, Councilman Bobzine, Officer Bobzine, could we get Chief Toomey to, and Chief, if you want to stand up so your face isn't partially in the light.
Hello?
Thank you.
I was not prepared for this, so bear with me, but I want to give a shout out to Officer Bicey, our mental health officer. She's done a tremendous job, and she's really highlighted the need of mental fitness in our community. I call it mental fitness. It's mental health, but it's something that needs to be worked on, just like your physical fitness, so that's why I refer to it as mental fitness. We have looked around the country and within our own state for co-responder programs, meaning pairing up with a social worker to come in and help us with the cases that involve alcohol or drugs addictions. Most crime is related to drugs and alcohol in one way or another. And if we address the addiction and the problem at the surface, we believe that it's going to make our community safer. So we have been in conversation with HSA and working a program out with them, learning lessons from other communities, and we feel we've really developed a really solid program. The details are still being ironed out, but for the dollars that it's going to cost, I think the payback is going to be tremendous. Not only are they going to help us on that end, but they'll also help us with our mental fitness within our police department, help our guys deal with the trauma that they deal with on a daily basis. So it's a huge program, and be happy to answer any questions. I also have Steve Rehorse, who has really put a lot of work into this as well, here to answer any questions.
Thank you.
So some additional details on this partnership. Would be a sworn officer partnered with a trained social worker, 20 to 25 hours a week. Again, we would utilize the National Opioid Settlement Fund dollars for this. Our commitment would be $30,000, which will be matched by HSA. Provides public education and prevention, reduces recidivism and relapse, improves crisis response, and as Chief mentioned, it would transition us out of the mental health officer position and into this co-responder model.
If I could add one thing, we'll always have the mental health officer position. It's just going to reduce the amount of work so that position can work on other police-related duties.
This is all contingent upon budget approval as well as an approved agreement between the city and HSA. So. All right.
Councilman Shetty has a question.
Not really a question, more of a comment. Just thank you for your work on that, Chief Toomey and City Manager Mack. You know, my wife and I had a situation earlier this year where we lost a daughter to opiate addiction, and what we witnessed in a different state, the police force had put together a team like this to kind of get a pulse of the streets and get a pulse on what's going on and not have someone slip through the cracks. And they were able to get them on the radar and follow up and meet with people and that are struggling in that area. And so we were able to see that there was a new venture they were making in this was in California, in the Modesto, California area, they just were implementing another phase of this, and we could tell it was going to be better than what they had. And so this continual improvement that you're working on, there will be fruit, I believe, and lives are at stake. on this, so I do appreciate your work on that.
Anything else on that? Okay. All right. Our next 2025 initiative is the citywide centralized facilities maintenance program implementation. So this would establish a proactive citywide approach to facilities maintenance, ensuring long-term sustainability and improved resource management and capital improvement planning. As part of this, as I mentioned earlier, we would do a comprehensive facilities study, which is a detailed analysis of all city facilities to assess current conditions and needs. It would provide a prioritized list of needed improvements and associated costs across all facilities. It would provide a centralized maintenance strategy. Right now, every department and frankly, every division are responsible for their own buildings, their own cleaning, their own maintenance. It's very decentralized. So it's creation of a unified program to streamline upkeep and repairs. This would be a new division of the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department. The facilities maintenance manager, would manage 6 existing FTEs consolidated into the new division. So again, we're not adding any additional employees. We're just consolidating the ones that we have. This manager would also manage the facilities study. So long-term cost savings would reduce repair costs and improve facility utilization through planned maintenance and upgrades. Reduced cleaning services budget through streamlining services, economy of scale purchasing, and lean approach for operations. And then efficient resource allocation. Provide for more effective budgeting for repairs and improvements based on data-driven insights from the facility study, and would provide for strategic deployment of internal resources for repairs, maintenance, and cleaning.
Councilman Beeler?
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager Mack, are we looking at outsource as a part of this strategy? Is that a component for,
Outsource for what?
well, maintenance, anything? I mean.
No, so this would be bringing, okay, no, but. So what you see in the 2025 budget is a consolidation of cleaning budgets, maintenance budgets, people who are tasked with those jobs within the organization, bringing them into one division. We also have cleaning services throughout the organization that are currently contracted. The goal for 2025 would be to transition out of those cleaning services fully or in part by 2026. So we've left some dollars in there for cleaning services. We have someone who cleans City Hall. We've got someone who cleans the PD, library. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this and completely nix those until we get the program up and running and can really assess what the needs actually are. So the long-term goal is to not contract out services related to cleaning, facilities, maintenance. But there are some dollars in 2025 to help support the new division. Yeah.
Councilman Tupper?
I know a lot of our facilities hold contracts with, and I'm just going to pick one out with, like Johnson Controls for maintenance on usually HVAC, stuff like that. Would those contracts go away then in the long run, or?
No.
Those are highly specialized, so.
Yeah, this division would manage those
Okay,
contracts.
that's what I was hoping to hear, so, yep.
Consolidate the contracts, again, for economy of scale, and then manage them.
And you said this would be under Parks and Recreation?
Parks and Recreation.
How was that
yes.
decision made to place it there?
Well, the Parks and Rec director and the Public Works director arm wrestled. And I don't know which one lost and which one won. No, really, when we looked at our existing or our current employees, most of them were housed within Park and Rec. Well, because we're going to get to the next thing, which is Fleet. Fleet is certainly a program that should be housed within Public Works, and we wanted to spread the wealth.
So when you're saying facilities, you've got wastewater.
We mean
plant.
everything except ball fields and, thank you, and sports complexes.
So like not, would that apply to, let's say, the bathrooms at City Park? Or,
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
So just, but let's say the concession stand at a ball field, that would be,
I'll let Dusty answer that.
okay,
Hold on.
yeah. I mean, I'm not talking the mowing or the painting of the lines, but like the actual physical building.
This would be more focused on building type facilities. Again, you look within the Park and Rec department, between the Wellness Center, the ice arena, the field house, the auditorium. There's a pretty good number currently within the Park and Rec department. Again, as Manager Mack mentioned, some of the staff within this currently are housed, a couple at the Wellness Center, a couple at the field house. And they do venture out into other areas, the pool, for example. Again, any building type facilities, and then you add that to, the police department. Any buildings, the new city hall. It's going to be managing those maintenance contracts, and really managing the facility study, while at the same time, looking how we best allocate existing resources for cleaning and general maintenance of those areas.
Thank you. All right.
All right, 2025 initiatives, the creation of a citywide centralized fleet management program. You'll notice that this does not say implementation, as we do think it will take some significant time to truly vet out what this program could and should look like, and any potential costs that would be associated with it would come in a 2026 budget request. So in 2025, we will design a comprehensive fleet management program to enhance operational efficiency, centralize oversight, and lay the groundwork for cost-effective and sustainable vehicle and equipment management starting in 2026. Much like our facilities, every department and every division handles their vehicle and equipment maintenance on their own. So we've got multiple places that we do oil changes at. We fix equipment and vehicles differently. Currently the PD has a part-time mechanic that just works on police cars. So really looking at how we can streamline that, and also with the future street facility, there is space programmed in that facility for fleet management. So the comprehensive fleet assessment would be to review and analyze, to establish citywide fleet inventory to identify usage patterns, maintenance needs, and opportunities for optimization. Evaluation of existing citywide vehicle and equipment maintenance costs. Projections on centralized program efficiencies. It provides for cost-effective operations, so long-term savings through bulk purchasing of parts, materials, and supplies, and centralized fuel management. Effective citywide budgeting through centralized fleet replacement during planning in our CIP process. Centralized fleet oversight, so will be a unification of vehicle management to streamline maintenance, reduce duplication and waste, again, a lean approach, and enhance coordination. It would create a new division of public works upon plan implementation in 2026. And then it shifts towards scheduled preventative maintenance to reduce breakdowns, extend vehicle lifespans, and lower repair costs across the entire city fleet. This is what I would consider phase one of building a centralized fleet management program. We do believe we can utilize internal talent who have experience with creating fleet management programs, and will require coordination with every city department. Every department has a vehicle or a piece of equipment that would qualify as fleet. So really taking the time to build what the needs are. Phase 2, depending on where we're at with the street facility, could come with that consolidation of efforts. You know, even if we're still contracting out our oil changes, for example, we could send them all to the same place, you know, instead of everybody doing their own thing. So that would be the goal with fleet management in 2025. Anything you'd like to add? No? Any questions on that?
Councilman Tupper.
Would this possibly utilize the better use of vehicles also if you had a fleet maintenance? So let's say, I don't want to pick on any department. Department A has a vehicle that very seldom comes over for maintenance because it very seldom gets used. But now you got Department B that has a one with 230,000 miles on it. It's not in the budget to replace a vehicle. Could that work kind of hand in hand where we could switch some vehicles around with the fleet maintenance manager to?
Yeah, I think that could be a possibility.
Can think
I don't want to speak out of turn, but the library, you guys don't have a vehicle, do you? Yeah, determined that it was just easier to turn in mileage, right? So in a situation like that, it probably wouldn't take much to shift that vehicle from the underutilized department and move it into one that had a need there.
Maria, you do have carts that move books. Councilman Peters?
Yeah. How many vehicles do we have that anybody can, not like cop cars and ambulance, how many like vehicles can we check out if you're an employee to take to Sioux Falls? Like the example I would give is when I was with state government, you'd have you could rent a car from Fleet and Travel for the day or whatever.
So we don't really have a program like that. That'd be part of the assessment. So just thinking about City Hall, right? So we have admin housed here. We have engineering, IT, even though they're moved out right now, and community development. So IT has their own vehicles that they use for shuttling equipment around. Community development has their own vehicles that they do inspections and such with. Engineering has their own vehicles for when they're out on projects. So really the only vehicle that's available for general use would be the Public Works Yukon that's out there. Otherwise, it's all very departmentalized. So.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. What is the budget ask on this for this year?
There is not one.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's move on to revenue. All exciting things. Here's the general fund revenue. You'll see the 2023 actual, what was adopted in 24, and what is being requested in 25. Sales and use tax, so this would be the first penny, be 10.5 million. Property tax is 4.1 million. Transfers in is 2.65. Again, that's from wastewater, solid waste, and municipal utilities. Services, fees, and others, it'd be 4 million, and then other tax is 1.25 million. General fund expenditures. Again, 23 actual, 24 adopted, and 25 requested. I want to give you the breakdown here. So public safety, 10.6 million. That includes police, fire and ambulance, and E911. Public Works, Conservation and Development includes the airport transfer out, community development, engineering, Public Works admin, snow removal, and street, and that's at 6.3 million. Culture and recreation is parks, recreation, and forestry. It is forestry, library, and the park and rec transfer out. General government is you all. HR, finance, the contingency, city manager, city hall, and the attorney. And then health and welfare, which these are budgetary or budgetary distinctions, but they include animal control and code enforcement, which are actually housed under public safety, but we track them through the health and welfare line. The cemetery, which is housed under park and recreation, and mosquito control, which is a hodgepodge of, which nobody wants, but it's there. And then our outside agencies, you can see that, again, this is general fund of about $500,000. Any questions on that? Okay, general fund transfers out. So again, as we talked earlier, Park and Rec is a special revenue fund. So you can see that historically, that transfer out to Park and Rec has gone anywhere from 1.8 million to the 2025 request of 1.84, with a high of 2.5 in 2023. Upper Big Sioux was eliminated in 2023. And then you'll notice that there is not a transfer out proposed in 2025 to E911, and that is because we were successful in asking the state to raise that surcharge from $1.25 to $2. So that has helped significantly. Now the airport is an enterprise fund, just like wastewater and solid waste. The airport, however, does not produce enough revenue to maintain its operations and does require a transfer from the general fund. So you'll see the 2024 adopted transfer for the airport was $500,000, and the request in 2025 is just under $800,000. Right, and 21, 22, and 23, there was not a transfer out due to ARPA and COVID money that came in. Any questions on that? Okay. Parks Fund revenue. So you'll see that just about 50% of the revenue for the Park and Rec Fund comes from fees and services that we provide. So when you pay your pool pass, when you buy your entrance into the zoo, that accounts for 48% of the revenue that parks bring in. The transfer in from the general fund, you'll see in 2025 is about 1.84 million. We also transfer in from the Triple B fund. 600,000 is the request this year, and then a utilization of capital outlay? No, of unrestricted, excuse me, of about 600,000. And then the parks expenditures. So of all of those dollars, about 28% go to the zoo. About 20% is for the parks system. 18% is the golf course. 12% is the ice arena. 9% is rec programs. 7% is the aquatic center, and 6% is supervision. And we also did some consolidation of departmental budgets that happened in 2024. So we consolidated I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly, the auditorium into the rec programs budget, and then city park and camping and the softball and baseball complexes were consolidated into the parks system budget. So prior to this current budget year, all of those had their own individual budget.
Councilman Peters, you got a question?
I hate to bring it up,
No.
but I have to talk about the zoo. Are we going to talk about the cash injection for this coming year? I'm looking ahead here and I don't see it, so I'm just wondering if we should cover it now.
That's what this is. I mean, so
That's the 1.64 is this year? Or for 25?
So that is the planned expenditures for the zoo. Dusty can speak more eloquently to the, transfer in that goes to the zoo.
You're looking, you understand what I'm asking, just what the gap is of what the city is gonna be fulfilling to keep it operating? The subsidy level, yeah.
Historically.
Director Rodick, would you just use the microphone? Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Pete. In general, I don't have the specific number in front of me, but I believe revenues are projected, in that $650,000 range for 25. So essentially, your offset is going to be approximately $1 million. I think it's like 960,000. We've done a lot of massaging numbers, trying to really fine tune some of that, but it'll be in that neighborhood.
Oh, yeah. Do we have an economic impact study of what the zoo brings in for sales tax dollars?
There has been one done. I don't have that information.
How old is it?
Yeah,
It's been a couple of years, before my time.
But actually, that would probably be good to
Yeah.
bring out and for the current council and refresh all of our memories.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I do think that roughly $1 million subsidy has remained the same for a while.
Probably the last 3 years, counting 25 requests in that neighborhood.
Councilman Shetty?
Moving on from the zoo, but on the same category, there's the golf course. Just another question, how does the golf course come in as far as subsidy, or does it come out in the black? Or?
The golf course, at least over the last 2 years, has significantly improved in their performance. Again, from a percentage standpoint, I believe, in 22 or 23, the golf course was recovering maybe 75% of its cost, operating, strictly, not including capital. I believe the projection for 25 is closer to 95%, maybe even 98%. So, again, we've got a quality course, and people want to play it.
Appreciate your work to get that turned around, or you and
It wasn't me.
right,
It's the
right.
staff.
Everybody, exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the Park and Rec Fund? Okay. So enterprise funds just shows where we're at. So the airport, again, transferring in about 800,000. Revenue is 8.4 million, which does include some grant-funded projects, and then 400,000 in reserves. Sewer, income of 7 million, transfer out to the general fund of 1 million, and then 3.4 million of expenses. And then solid waste, 5.7 million in income, 600,000 in reserves, and then transferring out about 700,000 with 5.6 million in expenses. Any specific questions on that?
Councilman,
Right here.
oh, Councilman Peters.
On the airport, are those grants project specific? Can you remind me? Are they like revenue operating?
No,
specific?
they're project specific.
So if and when they sunset, which they will.
Yes.
So it'll be the difference there is really what will be left to fulfill if income doesn't go up. Do we know when those grants go away?
You can speak.
I can let Finance Officer Bob Zane correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe these numbers as they're structured relate to specific capital projects for next year, which I believe we have slated to be taxiway improvements. And so those project costs are a one and done expense and revenue on the grant side. So once those projects are cleared out, you'll see another string of them come in the 26 requests and so on and so forth as we continue to chip away at the airport improvement plan.
Right?
Okay. Other special revenue funds. On the right side is the 2024 adopted, And then you can just see the difference in what we're proposing in 2025. 911, like we talked about, we're coming out with a surplus in that special fund because of the increased surcharge. Triple B, we're transferring out a little bit more into Park and Rec. Library fines, again, just using a little bit more of that. And then the Wellness Center, which I think is probably a good one to talk about. So we went from a $106,000 deficit in 2024, meaning we're using reserves, down to about a $16,000 deficit. And again, these are special revenue funds. They are not enterprise funds. So covering the shortfall with reserve dollars or unrestricted cash is appropriate. Part of how we were able to reduce that deficit within the Wellness Center was to move those positions, those maintenance and custodial positions, out of that fund into the general fund for the facilities maintenance program. But also, I just think this is a great chart for the public. You hear a lot that, well, not a lot, but sometimes people comment that, the Wellness Center isn't even paying for itself, but it is. I mean, by and large, it is covering almost all of its expenses, just simply through the fees that we charge to utilize the facility. I don't have any specific questions
And does
about
that take in because I know the Wellness Center has a lot of weekends where it has swim meets, basketball tournaments, that is reflected in this revenue.
That's correct. So any of those events that are at the Wellness Center is getting that revenue.
Councilman Peters?
So last year, we had a discussion about the monthly and annual fees, how it was actually cheaper to be on monthly than annual. You remember that? Did we ever get those reversed or flip-flopped, because in theory, it should make more sense if people are paying annual.
Right. They're working on it. Dusty or Teresa's here as well, can speak to that directly, but I think you'll likely see some changes in the fee resolution to address that.
Councilman Shetty?
Thank you. We can't let Ms. Gruner get away with not saying anything in the library. So what are the library fines, expenditures? What do we use that for?
The library's fine fund is generally used
Give her the
for...
mic, please. Thank you.
The library's fines fund is generally used to pay for a lot of our technology that we have in the library, like our surveillance cameras, things like that. It is used to entirely fund our programming, so all of the programming held at the library is entirely paid out through the fines fund. It's also occasionally used for a few things like office supplies.
All right, moving on. External funding. So I wanted to remind you all of the policy that was adopted, I think 2 budget cycles ago now, regarding external funding and municipal subsidies. So when we review the requests that come in, this is part of what we look at to determine recommendations going forward. So contributions to external organizations, and this includes all funds, so it's the general fund and the Triple B fund, what was requested, and what has been recommended in the budget. There were some new requests, the Watertown Cares, the Goss, Watertown Figure Skating Club. There was a significant increase in request from, I have to find it here. The Beacon Center. And that is specifically related to the cut in federal funding that they have taken on the last 2 years. So there is time before final, not only before final approval of the budget, because all of these numbers are included, but before the next fiscal year, if there's a desire of the council to have a more in-depth conversation about these contributions and adopt the aforementioned recommendations. If you'd like to do that. You all look like you have something to say, but you're not saying it. Okay.
Councilman Beeler?
No, I agree. I think this is something we need to probably discuss a little bit more in depth. Thank you.
Okay.
And, Councilman Peters? And City Manager Mack, you have asked for a more, I just want to highlight to the public that in years past, this was done very casually, and that has at least been changed to be a more formal process of a request. Would you explain that, please, to
Yes,
everyone watching?
so we do have an online application now. We do request certain financial information from the organizations. Really, there are certain, well, let me back up. There are a couple of organizations on here that were contractually obligated for the contributions. So Boys and Girls Club is an example of that. We have a contract with them. Watertown Development Company, we've pledged $200,000 for 5 years. So the others are really just based on where revenues sit, if we believe it falls within the mission of the work that you all want to do. We're making progress in streamlining this and trying to take the subjectivity out of it, but it still needs to be massaged a little bit. Part of that financial stability policy that you all will be reviewing in November includes some enhancements to the external organization policy.
Councilman Beeler?
Thank you, Mayor. To the mayor's comment earlier about we did this casually, perhaps we did. I know that at one point we had council people that were a part of that process that went through these interviews and helped in the decision-making. I should know this, but I don't. Who does make the decision on what we do for this funding?
Well, ultimately, it's you all through the budget approval. Internally, it's myself and the finance officer review all of the applications and weigh them against the criteria. Because it is part of the budget, right? Like it's the manager's proposed budget.
Yeah, I mean, I know at one time, some of these organizations didn't bring a budget. We didn't know what their restricted or unrestricted fund balances were.
Right.
It was a little bit crazy.
Well, it's a shift for
Yeah.
these organizations as well. They're all worthy. They all do great work in our community. But as you can see, $1.2 million worth of requests is a significant impact. And the next slide is related to IM28, which could have a $2.4 million impact to the city's budget. And so being strategic on where those dollars are deployed to is going to be even more important in the years to come.
Councilman Peters?
Did you say that we had a 5-year contract with the WDC for 200,000?
Yes.
So why have we been giving them 250?
Nope, that's the amount they requested. So that's requested, and then the,
Last year it was 200.
yeah,
Okay.
yes. So they are in a new capital campaign, and so their initial request when they entered in the new campaign was for 250.
Okay. Yeah. So we do plan to talk about this later?
Just tell me when. Yeah.
We will.
Okay, all right. Well, and just for formality's sake, when you approve the budget or appropriation ordinance, you are approving spending authority. So if you approve the ordinance in November and it includes all of these requests, that means if we decide, or you all decide that you want to give all of these requests, you're covered. You don't have to do a budget amendment. But there's nothing to preclude you from saying, okay, even though it's in the budget, we want to reduce this, or we've decided that this doesn't meet our goals, so we're not going to fund this. And so just from a process perspective, you can approve the budget ordinance and still make changes to these if you desire.
Councilman Peters?
So the thing I'm struggling with here a little bit is, we talked about that revolving loan fund for daycare once it's formed. It's not formed, there's nowhere to put it right now. But what happens if we find out in 3 months that there is somewhere to put that money? How are we allocating for that, or how are we thinking about that?
So I would recommend, if you were going to do that, that one, you'd fund it out of unrestricted cash. If the city were going to contribute dollars to it, that's where I would take it from. And I would, if the city's going to house the revolving loan fund, which I would not recommend at this point, you'd put it in a restricted account. That's all that it can be used for. I've seen throughout my time as a city manager and in talking with my peers, things like that, until they're established, you really don't have a place to budget for them. And so that is why you've got contingency and why you've got unrestricted cash, because there are things that do come up throughout the year that you either didn't anticipate or didn't know how to anticipate. When you approve a budget, you're approving spending authority. It doesn't mean that that's all the dollars you have to spend. Anything else on this? Okay. So item 28, I know we've talked about this extensively, but we would be remiss if we didn't include something in the budget about it. So if passed, it would prohibit the state from collecting sales or use tax on items for human consumption, which includes food and drink. It is unclear if cities will be able to continue to collect those taxes. It has been stated by the Attorney General, and I believe the Legislative Research Council, but I want to be quoted on that this bill will have to be figured out either through the courts or through the legislature. If it does impact cities, we're looking at a $2.4 million reduction in our sales tax collection. So 1.2 from the general fund and 1.2 from the capital fund. So if it is implemented in July of 2025, like I mentioned earlier, we do believe we can cover that. It would essentially be $1 million shortfall through reserves. But we may come forward and request, reducing or eliminating services, initiatives, or contributions in 2026. If it does pass, 2026 will be just a different kind of budget. So, any questions?
Councilman Beeler?
It's me again. City Manager Mack, just a quick question. It probably isn't going to make a big difference, but, there is some discussion about whether or not tobacco would or would not be included. I think alcohol is the one that they did state that would not be included.
Alcohol is not included.
Right.
Prepared foods are not included.
Yep.
But it's my understanding that yes, tobacco, it depends on how you define consumption. So the intent, I believe, of the bill was to eliminate the sales tax on food. It was written to eliminate the sales tax on consumables.
Right.
And
But it doesn't spell it out. I don't believe it spells out tobacco. So if in fact tobacco, would that have much of an effect on this for Watertown?
I can't answer that.
Okay.
Of that 2.4, I'm not sure where those dollars are broken down into. But I do believe that the prevailing opinion is that tobacco would be included as a consumable.
This does not reflect that. This 1.2 million does not reflect that.
So to be
Right.
clear, it's 1.2 from the general fund and 1.2 from the CIP. So it's 2.4, and I do believe it does reflect that. Yes.
Thanks.
Moving on, 2025 CIP. So what you will not see in the 2025 CIP, street facility, fire station, clubhouse, other council priority projects. Those will be presented during the long-range workshop in November. But what you will see is some new terminology, what we're calling the operational capital budget. So these are what we would consider normal and customary capital purchases for a community. Police cars, fire trucks, road improvements. Anything that is above and beyond that, we've got on a list that you all can prioritize and that we can figure out how to fund in the long term. So CIP revenue, our projected beginning balance in 2025 is just 5.6 million. We expect to bring in about 10.7 million in sales tax revenue, and then 1.7 in grants, and there's some other ancillary revenue sources. CIP expenditures, we've got 8.6 million in capital expenditures. Debt service, so all of our bonds, all of our sales tax bonds that we have issued are paid back through the 212 fund, and then our transfers out. And just a reminder, because it is such a large part of the 212 budget, here's where we currently sit with debt service and when some of these bonds will be dropping off the payment schedule. The capital expenditure summary, so public safety, about 800,000, public works, 4.7 million, parks and rec, 2.9 million, and then other, about 60,000, so we'll cover that. So public safety capital, some of the highlights in the fire and ambulance, we are replacing an ambulance and adding some onboard ambulance equipment. In the police department, we are cycling out 3 vehicles, and then you'll remember that the Bearcat was approved this year but won't arrive until 2025. So bringing the total, man, my commas are off on that, the total public safety dollars to 862,000. Any questions there? Okay. I tell you, I looked at this presentation no less than 20 times, and I missed it. All right, Public Works capital. So on the vehicle and equipment side, you'll see that we are planning to lease 5 pieces of equipment versus outright purchasing them. We have done some calculations that it still makes sense financially to continue to lease versus purchasing. So that's about 750,000. And then if you go over on the project side, so the pavement management program is scheduled for 3.2 million. Now that is a reduction from the 2024 budget, but it does include 2 million in mill and overlay, 750,000 for a neighborhood reconstruct, and 500,000 for crack, chip, and fog seal. We have our miscellaneous concrete repairs, so those are our ADA curb ramps, drainage, valley gutters. We've got our annual bridge inspection, and then the city's cost share with the county for the 14th Avenue bridge replacement. Any questions on that? Okay. Parks and Recreation Capital, and this total is wrong. I will update it before I send the final presentation out to everyone. But Park and Rec facilities, you'll see things that we have talked about. We've got some improvements at Thunder Road. As you know, we have a new entity leasing that. The carnivore habitat at the zoo, Discovery Center furnace, golf path repair, heater and boiler at the Wellness Center, roof restoration at the Wellness Center, vehicles and equipment. We did transition to a lease option for the fitness equipment at the Wellness Center. That happened in 2024. A mower, a couple mowers, a forestry chipper truck, and a golf utility vehicle. And then on the facility and improvements side, We've got a campground drainage project. You'll see an asterisk there as we need to determine the feasibility and viability of that project. But if we can make it work, we estimate that's what the cost will be. The ADA playground at McKinley Park, that would be a joint venture between the city and the Optimus Club. The city's contribution on that would be $250,000, but we do budget for the full amount since they are on a reimbursement type project. The River Ridge Park development, $250,000. We are planning $250,000 for the next 3 years to set aside specifically for River Ridge Park. Some sidewalks and walkways, tennis court painting, the bike trail, again, budgeting $520,000, but that is part of the state matching grant. Eastwood's trail renovation, and then the cemetery office renovations. Any questions about Park and Rec?
Councilman Tupper?
This question would probably be directed toward Director Roddick. $70,000 for fairway mower? That's how much they are? That's just one piece of equipment?
It's one.
I should sell those.
One thing I wanted to, one thing I wanted to point out as it relates to the CIP as a whole, whether we're looking at just year 25 or we're looking at the long term, the 2024 budget year is the first time that that all capital expenditures over 25,000 were accounted for in the CIP. Prior to 2024, it was only, fire trucks, ambulances, road projects, and transfers to E911. So we expanded, what's in that fund, which certainly has put pressure on that fund, but we now have a clear picture of what the comprehensive capital needs for the city are. When a lot of those were housed in the general fund, well, it's real easy to cut equipment, right? Because they're a big number and that's how you make your budget work. But that doesn't help on the capital side when you need to replace equipment. So that was a shift for 2024 that I think has been valuable in helping us really learn and understand what the actual needs of the organization and operations are. And then lastly, other capital expenditures. This is that nearly $60,000 for updating our GIS mapping. And
Councilman Beeler?
what? Yeah, I know.
I have a quick question in that regard. Are we doing a flyover again? Is that part of that cost? Is it? Thank you.
Are you flying the plane?
I mean, if you want me to. I might need a few lessons.
And with that,
I'll take the pictures.
we are, I and my team are ready and willing to answer any additional questions you might have. And look forward to bringing the budget ordinance in front of you all at the first meeting in November.
Councilman Beeler?
I don't know that I have any questions right now, but I do have a few comments that I'd like to make. First of all, as always, thank you very much. This is really probably the most well-done report that I've seen in 8,000 years as a council guy. So really very good. And I like the fact that this is easy, and I think we're being transparent, which is part of one of our objectives, I think. But I think it makes it very clear and very easy for the public to understand. And I really appreciate the fact that we're looking at the guidelines that the council has kind of established, like you brought up early on. I like to see that, and that we're developing this budget around those things, and that we are looking at reductions. But one of the things that I'm most impressed with is the whole mindset that we're going to look at internal processes, we're going to look at our efficiencies, and look at areas where we might be able to automate. But I'm sure if we all put our heads together in that regard, we can come up with a lot, and that will help us a great deal, I think. So I applaud you folks for what you've done here today. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilman Shetty?
Yeah, just again, I too just appreciate your work because I'm sure it's been some challenging conversations, some of these changes, implementing from fleet management to facility management to whatever else. And I've got to believe we're not always on the same page in these meetings, but I do appreciate that we're unified today. Even if we don't agree on something, we're working together to get to a better direction. So I do appreciate your work.
Thank you. I'd just like to say I sat through a couple of the budget meetings, and I'd like to thank all the department heads for coming in and working with city manager, finance officer, and going through that process. It was the first time ever, and want to applaud everyone for stepping up to represent their department, but also understanding that the city is all one big team. So, thank you. Councilman Tupper?
Kind of an echo on that, and it's kind of a new turn to the new form of government that we're getting into more reality budgeting, put it that way. And I know it's something that Amanda has worked on very hard, but without her staff and department heads and division heads, that we could never get to this. But it is really a more reality type budget than what we've worked on in the past. She couldn't have did it without all the help of all the department heads, and I'd just like to give them all a big thank you for everything, the hard work and dedication they put in every day.
Thank you. City Manager Mack, or anyone, would you or anyone on your team like to have a word?
Kristen? Susie Sunshine? Come on.
Debbie Downer, thank you for the food.
You're welcome. I would like to just, I think it's easy for the narrative to become that past budgets were unrealistic or inflated, but that's not really the reality. The reality is that we now have better information in front of us to make better informed decisions. Our old finance software really was garbage. I mean, just to be blunt, and didn't allow us to pull the right kind of data to make sure that we were producing budgets that didn't have a lot of fluff in it. Additionally, well before my time and well before I think a majority of the people up here, the prevailing philosophy when departments were putting together budgets with former mayors of the past was, well, put in a little extra just to make sure you got enough. Well, that's what contingency is for. I mean, we have a contingency budget, that we don't use. So we got these dollars sitting aside for things that come up. And so changing that philosophy that we're going to be right-sized, we're not, at this point, we haven't reduced beyond what we've actually used over the last 5 years, but recognizing that when things come up that we didn't anticipate, we do have some dollars set aside to cover those, rather than building contingencies into every operating budget. And so it really is just a shifting in philosophy and doing the best that we can with the information that we have in front of us. And this process, we had better, clearer information in front of us to help inform what's been presented to you all. And it was not without a lot of hard work. And when you're shifting a philosophy like that, it really is easy to feel like there's a loss, right? And even though we can look at the last 5 years and we can budget based off the last 5 years, and it's not a reduction, but because it's not that, instead of 10,000, it's 5,000. It's very easy to be concerned that we're not going to have the dollars we need to operate. But I am convinced that we do have the dollars we need to operate. And in the one-off situations that occur, we do have the resources to manage those appropriately.
Councilman Tupper?
I'm going to add one thing to that, and I know a lot of you, I know City Manager Mack and the mayor have heard me say this, but, and I won't speak to who the individual is or what company it is, but typically in government, whether it's city, state, county, school districts, whatever, with this gentleman that called on him, he said, I love the month of December. And I'd ask him why, and he said that's when everybody has all these extra dollars in their budget that they need to spend, just because it was there. And he would sell tons of stuff in the month of December. This is kind of getting us away from that part of it, and it's getting more in reality, so we don't need to be like every other government entity, put it that way.
Well, and you will feel relieved to know that that actually isn't how Watertown has operated. So, which is why we were able to reduce that structural deficit, because those dollars just weren't being used. Now, I've witnessed that in other communities. I've seen it with other, not just government, but there are some private sector agencies who do that as well. But by and large, that wasn't happening. So we do have a true reflection of what it takes to operate the city of Watertown. So, but those are all great points to just keep at the forefront of our thoughts.
And I'd like to point out, every year this finance department wins an award for basically a good budget. So it's not like we've been doing things poorly. We've been doing things well, but I appreciate the effort to continually improve and make a good thing even better. Are there any future council items read ahead? Is there any public comment? Anyone would like to address the council on anything? Close the public. Close public comment. There's no reason to go into executive session. Therefore, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Jurens. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, the movement is to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries.